recording, and once we get it going. Okay, so I am now going to turn it over to Alison.
Great. And let me start at the beginning, which would make good sense. Don't worry, I'll not be going that fast. All right. Thank you all for being here. We're going to basically tonight try to answer the question, how do I talk about abuse without scaring my family to death, without scaring my children? And so when we're done, that will be the tips and tools that you'll have in your tool belt. Two just points of information before we get started. The first one is that we talk a lot about self-care in this work, just because we never quite know. Today we're going to be talking about prevention, how we're going to get ahead of this problem, what we're going to do. But even with the positive, proactive content, you never know what slide or what thing that someone says might make you think of someone that you love or experience that you've had. And so one of the beauty pieces of doing this virtually is that if you need to get up and get some water or stretch or move, we can't see you. And so you can do what you need to do. They always say, put your own oxygen mask on before you help the people around you. And if it's 7 p.m. in your homes, I can imagine there's a lot of different oxygen masks you're dealing with books and stories and bed and all those things. So just a reminder for self-care and to be aware. And if there's anything that you want to ask more about afterwards, I'll have my email at the end if you want to ask one-on-one, or you can throw it in the chat. And then the other piece of reminders is that we're going to be talking today about a lot of different prevention tools and tips and things that you can do. And so usually when we're talking about, it's less about the problem tonight, more of what we can do about it. And so that tends to have people feeling really hopeful when they are done. And that will be my goal. So if I did my job right, no one, we're leaving feeling empowered and not freaked out. So I believe strongly in the power of prevention. I love the work of getting ahead of the problem. I grew up very connected to my faith community, and I grew up very connected to the arts community. I don't know if you'll be able to tell in our short time together tonight, but musical theater was kind of my thing as a kid, and doing community theater and things like that, as well as sports. And for me, my youth serving organization experience, my faith community experiences were huge, wonderful protective factors in my life and positive experiences. I know that friends, family, other folks did not have those same experiences in those communities. And so I'm all about how can we make communities safe for everybody so that everybody is getting the protection and the joy of being in a healthy community. And so today we're going to be talking about what each of us can do for that power in prevention. I want to start just by thanking you for making time to be here. I know you probably have if you're anything like me, you have a to-do list on the fridge of like 12 things that you want to get done before tomorrow. And I know that there's a lot of things pulling for your time. And when you hear, like, ooh, talking about abuse, is that going to be, it's not necessarily the first thing people sign up for in the world. And so thank you for making time to learn tonight. And I believe in the ripple effect of prevention, where when one person feels empowered, they pass that on. And so I'll be really excited to see how that energy plays out in your faith community. We believe it's a kid's job to be a kid, and it's the grown-up's job to keep them safe. And that's one of the mantras we use a lot, especially with kiddos who are more anxious or more nervous about things. It's like, we all know the kid, and we may have the kid in our life where we learn about tornado safety, and for the next 6 months, they're like, is that a tornado? Is that a tornado? And so, one of the pieces is, well, it's your job to be a kid. It's my job to keep you safe. And the best way that we can do this together is by communicating. And so let me know if you're, and we'll get more into specifics here, but just that idea, this is really an adult problem, an adult issue. Adults need to own the fixing of it. We can't put prevention solely on the shoulders of a kid. That's not fair and it's not effective. We can give kids some information to help with prevention, but I never want people to think that the goal here is to give all the information to the kids, because it's really us as adults knowing the warning signs, acting when we're seeing the warning signs, doing what's in the best interest of the kids. I also, I can't talk about prevention in 2021 without talking about the pandemic. Just wanting to send my heart to you all. I myself have never parented during a pandemic before. It's been a whole roller coaster of all the things and lots of times of isolation and lots of times of frustration. And when we add things that feel past our control on top of things that are already feel past our control, that can just be a lot of anxiety and anger and frustration. And just a reminder of, if we can anchor what we do with our kids in love, that is what they will remember. That is what they will feel. I like, sometimes I will have these ideas of, I'm going to do this wonderful thing. And this wonderful thing turns into a very small, wonderful thing, but my child remembers the love that was behind it. And so just that idea of being gentle with yourselves, being gentle with your expectations. And if you're angry, if you're frustrated, if you don't want one more thing to be thinking about, I get it. And so just to honor that and where people are at in the pandemic. So that's all sort of the building blocks. Let's get into prevention. My name, as I said at the beginning, my name is Alison, and I serve as the director of Jacob Wetterling Resource Center. Many of you in California probably don't know the name Jacob Wetterling. He's the young man who's pictured, the boy, not a young man, the boy who's pictured on your screen. Jacob was in 6th grade in central Minnesota when he was abducted. Jacob and I grew up together. We did theater together. Our families played soccer together, those kinds of things. His mom was the president of the PTA at our school when he was taken. His dad was the president of the local NAACP. So they were both community organizers, very well connected to people who knew how to get things done. And they worked very, very hard to keep Jacob's face out there in the world until we had news about what happened to Jacob. Jacob was missing for 27 years before we had answers. And there was a songwriter in St. Joseph, Minnesota, where Jacob was from, who wrote a song. And in the song, he said, "There's a dream that we dream how the world should be, where children are safe and where children are free. But we know for this to happen, we must make it so, for we are Jacob's hope." And so as a kid, the kid who sat next to me in math class was suddenly gone because he was abducted. Like, that doesn't happen. And my brain couldn't wrap its head around it. It still can't. But different people handle trauma in different ways. And for me, the more that I learned about it, the less freaked out I was. So I was the 6th grader in the public library being like, "Where are your books on sex offenders?" And they're like, "Who are you? Do you have a parent permission slip?" Like, that was just how my brain handled, like, the more I could learn, the less scared I was that this was going to happen to somebody else. And so I kind of dove into the learning part, which then changed the trajectory of my life. And there's so much in our lives we can't control. We can't control a lot of the bad things that happen, but we do get to control how we respond to it. I've heard the phrase before in my life, hurt people hurt people. But I prefer the phrase healed people heal people. I think people who have, I think some of our best advocates, some of our best allies are people who have been hurt and say never again, or people who've witnessed hurt and say that's not going to happen on my watch. And so I got into this work as a kid because of what happened to Jacob in 1989. And then the more that I did this work and the more that I met families and the more that I was invested in this, I majored in missing children at a university where you can design your own major. I got my master's degree in criminal justice, and I met more and more people as an advocate I became a sexual assault advocate in 1999, where I learned that Jacob's case isn't the most common by any means. We'll talk about that. Those cases are very rare, but they get a lot of publicity when they happen. And how do we prevent Jacob's case from ever happening again? And how do we prevent any case of a child being harmed from happening again? And we do that by thinking about prevention as a spectrum. The Prevention Institute uses this idea of, when we're thinking about prevention, what are all the different ways we can be working in prevention? So my area of expertise, what I do my most work on, or to do the most academic work on, is around missing kids. So if I go in that purple area and talk to little ones about empower me and about, check first before you go somewhere with someone, those kinds of messages, that's a piece of prevention. But we also want to be thinking about, like, policy and legislation, the Amber Alert. Since we've had the Amber Alert in Minnesota, every single time that it has been used, except for one, that child has been recovered alive. And so that idea of empowering the individual and then empowering policy and legislation, thinking about organizational practices. I have a friend of mine, I tend to be the person who my friends call when they have a question about child safety. Surprise, because the work that I do day in, day out. But I had a friend of mine whose child was in gymnastics. And she said, this was pre-COVID, but she said, I go to the gymnastics meets and one of the coaches lifts up my child and picks her up and carries her from event to event. So, like, pick her up and bring her to the vault and pick her up and bring her to floor. And like, it just as a parent, she can walk. Like, what is this picking up carrying thing? But I don't know. I don't want to be the problem parent. I don't want to bring stuff up if it's, a cultural piece of gymnastics that I just don't know about. So what would you do? Because I'm just really struggling with it. And I said, well, we want to listen to that gut feeling. And if your gut feeling is saying there might be a problem, followed up by asking about policy. I said, reach out to the gym. They want to keep their gym safe. They want to keep their kids safe, and just ask to see a copy of their child abuse prevention policy. Because then you can see, it's easier to say, instead of just like my gut instincts going off, being like page 4, bullet point 3 says this, do we need to retrain on this? It's just easier to start with policy. And I said, so I asked to see a copy of the policy. She called me back 10 minutes later and she said, well, I called the gym and asked to see a copy of the policy. And they said they don't have one because they don't hire people who have been arrested for hurting kids. And at that point, like, my brain explodes, because most of the people who cause harm we don't know about. Are there not people who have already pled guilty or served time or any of those things? It's a lot of unknown. And that's why we have monitoring and training and ways to intervene and to observe, and all these different pieces of policy to prevent people from being in a position where they may cause harm. And so just that idea of, when we think about prevention, today we're going to be spending time in this more purple area of community education and individual knowledge, but there might be things that you'll think about in policy in your own youth serving organizations. There might be a coalition or a network that you want to get connected. I should reach out to my PTA and make sure that they have online safety or things like that. We just want to think about prevention holistically. And there are a lot of myths around abuse prevention. And myths give us a false sense of security. Fear, and one of the big myths that I experienced doing this work is, I'll be at a school and I'll talk to the principal and I'll say, well, how many kids attended today's assembly or got the curriculum? You'll say something like, oh, well, 200 did. And then one parent pulled their kid out because they wanted to protect their innocence longer. And instead of being a normal person who drives home and thinks like, oh, 198 kids got the information, I'm thinking about the 2 that didn't, because that's how my brain works. And I think we don't do that for anything else. We don't say like, I'm going to pull my child out of bike safety and not teach them about helmets. I'm going to pull my child out of fire safety and not teach them about stop, drop, and roll. But it's how we talk about safety in a way that empowers and doesn't freeze kids. When you think about how we talk about fire safety, we don't say like, here's how a 3rd-degree burn feels like on your body. Not helpful, just scary. And that's not going to help any kid in safety other than just freaking them out. The same thing with body safety. We don't say like, let's watch Law and Order together and see what Olivia's asking, like, not helpful. Instead, we say, okay, our family safety rule is we don't keep secrets from the people who take care of you. So now that our family safety rule, let's do some what ifs. And I'll get more into those specific family safety rules in a little bit, including that one, but just as an example. So it's the fear freezes us, education moves us to act. And so we want to make sure that kids have enough education so that they can be moved to act, that they're not frozen, but we don't want to talk worst case, scary, nightmarish scenarios. Not helpful. So thinking about that idea of how can we move kids to act? And one of the examples I'll give here is one of my very good friends brought her 2 children with her husband to Disney World. And they had a plan. If we get separated, and there's 100 different things you could do, but in their family, they just said, flag down a mom with kids, and her kids were old enough to give a cell phone number, and give them the cell phone number and ask them to call it. And their kids did get separated. One of their kids did get separated from the family. And one of the monorail things got in the wrong area. And so just flagged down a mom with kids, like, can you call my dad? She did, and they got off at the next stop and they all got connected and it was fine. But just that idea of he had enough information to know what to do, he had enough information to be able to act, versus a child standing in the monorail crying and frozen may have a harder time finding the right person to help them. So we want to give kids enough to be able to move forward. And so one of the big pieces here is we want to focus on the behavior of the person, not how we know them. We don't teach stranger danger for so many reasons. Because first, it's usually not someone that's unknown to the child, but kids have an image in their head of what they think a stranger looks like. I was working with kindergartners years ago, and I asked Alex to describe a stranger, and he said, well, he's coming out of an alley, he's wearing a trench coat, he hasn't shaved, and he smells really bad. So automatically Alex is thinking about this. You can like hear the theme music, right? Of the smoke and this guy coming out of the alley. Offenders get numbers. They can be all races, they can be all ages. And so to just have this, and they usually come across as very nice. Nice is different than good. That's a little Into the Woods reference there. Musical theater, it pops up here and there. But yes, that idea of they have an image in their head of what they think a stranger looks like. And if the person doesn't look scary, they don't connect it to the rule. It's mixed messages. If we say don't talk to people you don't know on the first day of school, everyone they meet they don't know, we want them to know how to ask for help, how to approach people they don't know. The good news is most people don't hurt kids. The good news is most people want what's best for kids. The good news is most people love children and want to be helpful. And so we don't want to scare them away from the very people who want to help them. And so knowing kids and teens are much more likely to be victimized by people in their circle, we want to focus on the behavior and not the relationship. And this is just sort of, very few people roll up their sleeves and change behaviors based on a statistic like, oh, that's the stat, let me change what I'm doing. But I do want to make sure you sort of have some of that. But this is basically our kidnapping cases are stranger, stereotypical kidnappings. It's like 100 to 300 of those in the United States every year. But on the flip side, about over 90% of people who cause harm to kids are known to the child. So we have that very small number of the kidnappings that we want to prevent. We also want to prevent the much bigger picture. And depending on the study, traditionally it's like 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 girls are harmed before they turn 18, 1 in 6 to 1 in 10 boys. And then kids who are non-binary, the CDC tells us that kids who are non-binary tend to be harmed. All GLBTQIA kids tend to be, the stat is they're harmed at the same rate or more than kids who fit into those 2 boxes. And so thinking about, we're talking about a lot of kids who may be targeted by people that they know, that they care about. So how can we equip ourselves to know the warning signs and act when we see them? And how can we equip our communities? And so 2 questions for safety, and then I'm going to pause and ask you all if you have questions, because when I talk about prevention, I get so excited, I talk really fast and I forget to breathe. So I will pause to breathe sometimes and ask questions. But our 2 questions to teach kids, even at a very young age, even at the age of 4 and 5, how does this person make me feel? What is this person asking me to do? If they're making my uh-oh feeling go off, that mixing bowl in my tummy, or that roller coaster that isn't fun, I need to check in with the person who takes care of me. If it's the person who takes care of me, who's giving me that mixing bowl or that roller coaster feeling, I need to check in with one of my other safety net adults. And we'll talk more about safety net adults as we go here. But are they making my uh-oh feeling go off? And then are they asking me to break a rule? What are they asking me to do? So it doesn't matter if I know them or not. Are they making me feel queasy? Are they asking me to break a family rule? If the answer is yes to either of those, I want to step away and check in with the person who takes care of me and let them know what's going on. If this person who's taking care of me is making me feel that way, I want to check in with someone else in my safety net. And so being aware that it's not, do I know them or not? Kids are much more at risk by the people we let into our homes through the front door than the people they meet when they go out through the back door to play. But it's, how are they making me feel? What are they asking me to do? And then also making sure that we're asking about that for kids their own age too, and older kids. How is this person making me feel? What are they asking me to do? It doesn't matter if our family likes them. It doesn't matter if our family knows them. It doesn't matter if they are family. If they're making you feel queasy, uh-oh feeling, mixing bowl in your tummy, any of those things, I want to talk about it. And if they're asking you to break a rule, I want to talk about that too. So I want to pause here and see if anyone has any questions before I keep launching about prevention. So I'm just going to pause and breathe.
And Alison, there are no questions in the chat right now, but if anybody has questions moving forward, please feel free to type those into the chat box.
Great. Hopefully not everyone is tuned out and that's why I don't have questions. You're just absorbing it all and taking it all in, which is great. But yes, do feel free to ask, and we'll have intentional question time at the end as well, and emails at the end in case you don't want to ask in front of everyone else. So how does this person make me feel? What is this person asking me to do? And so those are that's where we start with safety, and that's where we start when we're thinking about prevention. And that's when we start thinking about how to have these conversations. And so that's where we start. So we talk about that uh-oh feeling, letting kids know that our body, when we think from the religious context, God gives us a body and different parts of the body have different jobs. Our eyes can look to make sure that we're safe before we cross the street. Our ears can listen if there's a problem. Our gut, our tummy, depending on the age, is the part of the body that helps give us a warning sign if we're worried. And if you start feeling that mixing bowl in your tummy feeling, listen to that. You're allowed to say no to grown-ups and other kids if they're trying to get you to break a rule. Empowering kids to say, if someone doesn't know or has forgotten this rules or has different rules than our family does, and they're trying to get you to do something against our rules, you're allowed to say no, but check in with me about it so that I'm a grown-up and it's easier for grown-ups to talk to grown-ups about these things or grown-ups to talk to older kids about these things. So come and let me know and I'll help figure things out. And so that idea of you as a kid don't have to explain, well, our family safety rule, you can just come and check in with me and let them know that they don't know or have different family safety rules or forgotten family safety rules so that we can figure it out. Kids, one of the things just to be aware of is there are kids obviously who don't say no. Our bodies, when we're freaked out, we often go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, where we try to make the other person feel more comfortable. And so some kids just absolutely freeze, and then they feel like, oh, I didn't do it right. I should have said something. I screwed up. Guess what? Not your fault. You still have the right to say something, even if you freeze. I used to, in our Empower Me class that I do in schools, I used to talk to little ones about like bunnies because they're everywhere where I live in Minnesota. And it's like, if you walk by a bunny and it freezes, we still don't kick the bunny. If we walk by the bunny and it hops away, we don't kick the bunny. Either way, we give it its space, right? And then I was like, so our bodies, if someone's breaking our safety rules and we freeze, still no one has the right to make us feel scared or uncomfortable. We still can tell somebody. And then kids would be like, I have a bunny. I saw a bunny once. There's a bunny in my backyard. And then it would take a long time to like get back to the main core content. So, but just that idea of even if you don't say no, even if your body freezes, especially with 4th and 5th and 6th graders, I hear a lot of kiddos say like, well, I did it wrong. Guess what? It's a kid's job to be a kid. It's the adult's job to take on personal safety, and it's not your fault if someone makes you feel uncomfortable or unsafe. I saw that there were some chat things popping, so I'm just going to pause here for a minute and see if Shannon has anything to tell me before I keep going.
Allison, someone just wanted to make sure that you knew you were doing great, and someone said that they were taking it all in and you were very thorough and they thanked you.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you so much. Sometimes you feel like you're talking into a tunnel in Zoom when all you do is stare at your own face back at you in the screen. So that's very kind. Thank you. That's a little, thank you. Appreciate it. So again, that uh-oh feeling, teaching kids about their body and that uh-oh feeling helps keep kids safe, that voice that lives in our gut. And so when we think about, well, how do we talk about safety ongoing? There's so much power in what ifs, in what if scenarios. Two of the reasons kids don't speak up, and I do a whole separate training on disclosures. Most kids don't tell if abuse is happening until they're adults, if at all. And there's so many different reasons for that. And that would, again, it's its own training. And if we were in the same space together, we could bring some of those up, kids being afraid of the person or kids loving the person who's causing harm or feeling like everyone knows about it and no one's saying anything anyway, whatever it might be. Most kids don't tell. And so if you're ever in an experience where like, oh, why didn't my kid tell me? Most kids don't tell. And so being aware two of the reasons why most kids don't tell is they're scared of rejection and they're scared they won't be believed. And so when we think about that, one great way to talk about these things is just with what if scenarios. I have this as well when it comes to what if scenarios. And if you work with teenagers, you can imagine this pretty clearly. Kids will say, like, for example, I know how to stay safe online. But if you give them a what if scenario, like I was working with like 8th grade Girl Scouts and I said, what if you're on your laptop and someone asks you to flash the webcam? How would you handle that? And they thought about it for a while, and one of the girls raised her hand. She said, well, do I like him or not? And I'm like, oh, well, okay. And she said, I just really have a hard time saying no to people that I like. And I thought, that's really true and accurate. And let's talk about that. It is hard to say no to people that we like. And so when we do a what if, we can get into let's talk not just about be safe online, but let's do some what ifs so that we can think about how we'd respond and why sometimes it is hard to say no to people that we like, and adults have that same problem too. And so let's think of 3 or 4 ways that we could handle that where we would feel comfortable to say no and that we could tell somebody. And so with what ifs, we teach the safety rule and then we follow it up with a what if. So again, the safety rules will be coming up, but for example, we check in before we go over to someone's house, right? So that the person taking care of you knows where you're at. So, okay, that's our family safety rule. So what if you're outside and the next door neighbor says, oh, my dog just had puppies. Why don't you come over and look at them? Okay, our family safety rule is I would say, let me just go check first so my parents know where I'm at. I'll be back. And I'd come and tell you that the dog had puppies and ask if I could go. Great, that's what I would want you to handle it. And then I would go with you, or I would just know that you were there or what. But thank you. That's exactly what I'd want you to do before you go to their house. Great. And then a week or 2 later, it's like, well, what if one of the neighbors tells you that their cat has kittens? What do you do? Oh, I'd totally go over to their basement. I love kittens. Okay, let's review. The safety rule is before we go to someone's house, we check first the person taking care of us, right? So we teach the rule and then we make sure that they have the objective knowledge of what would I actually do if someone was breaking that rule. And so those what ifs can be really powerful. One more thing I should say about what ifs before I move forward. We did focus groups with junior high kids because we want to make sure that we're being accurate. And I was talking to them about what ifs. And I said, your parents have all done the online safety stuff and now they're doing what ifs. Is that helpful? Is that not? And they're like, yeah, it's really helpful because we can show them how much we know, right? But the 2 things that they don't enjoy, and so we want to avoid this. Number 1, don't use people that they know in the what ifs because that creeps them out. Like, what if your soccer coach, Bill, asks you to, like, what's wrong with Bill? What's Bill's deal? Like, what did he do? And versus just like, what if a coach? We don't want to, most people don't hurt kids. And so we don't want to put the air of suspicion on people. We're like, what if this specific person who's a member of our family sends you a picture?
Sorry, everyone, hang on just a second. I think Allison will be back. Allison, if you can hear me, you froze a couple seconds ago. So we'll see if you're able to reconnect here. Okay, everybody, if you can hang on just 1 second. I think Allison had to drop off. She's going to rejoin to see if that's going to help her get a better signal. So sorry about that. And everyone, when we get Allison back, we'll get her back on where she can share her screen. So we will get those documents back up. In the meantime, if anybody has any questions, let us know. And if you hang in there just a second, we'll get her right back. Okay, everyone, just really quick update. Allison is rejoining and she is turning on a different hotspot in her house in hopes that that is going to boost her internet signal a little bit more. So once we get her back, we don't expect to have any other problems. So thank you so much for your patience and we'll be back in just a second. Okay, everyone, we should be back shortly. So in the meantime, if you need a quick stretch break, we all sit or stand too much. So I'm going to march in place. So everybody march in place for just a second and we'll call it self-care. And also, we did have a question in the Q&A box asking if we would send this presentation after the webinar. What we are going to do is we are recording and we will make the webinar available to Menlo. We did not run the registration, Zero Abuse did not run the registration for this particular webinar. So we don't have people's individual email addresses, but I am guessing that someone from Menlo's staff who did manage that registration process will probably have everyone's emails. So we will ask that they will send that out to everybody who's on the call or on the meeting tonight, as well as to anybody else in the church that would like to have a copy. So thank you for that great question. And yes, we will get this out. We will get the recording out to everybody, so you don't need to take notes unless you'd like to. Okay, great. And Joan just let me know that Menlo does have the email information for all of you. So once it usually takes Zoom about a day to get the recording process where we can grab it and save it. And so we will get that to Joan and others at the church this week, and they will be able to get that out to you. So thank you so much, Joan. And we also have a question about the slides. I think it will be perfectly fine for us to also provide the slides, so we will do that as well. So thank you for asking about that. I'm going to write that down. Oh, and we also got a question about transcript. And we actually can get a transcript of this recording. So I will, just so folks know, that will take a couple extra days for the transcript to be completed. So I think what we'll do, since that's been requested, is we will wait until we have the video, the PowerPoint, and the transcript, so that we can provide all of those at one time and make those available to everybody. So that may take a few extra days if that's okay, but that will allow people to have that in a couple of different forms. So right now we will plan on doing that. Great ideas and questions, everyone. And I don't know where Alison is, so I'm going to text her and see what's happening. Okay, it sounds like Alison has figured out her internet connection and she should be back. She said, give me 30 seconds. So hopefully she'll be joining in just a second. And again, everybody, so sorry for the technology issues tonight. And everyone, I want you to know, I just put in the chat box a link to the Keeping Kids Safe section of Zero Abuse Project's website. This is part of our Jacob Wetterling Resource Center program. And on that Keeping Kids Safe website, there are a lot of pages that will help you with things like talking to kids about personal safety, online safety, information about conducting family safety nights, holiday safety tips, Halloween safety tips, what we can do related to victim assistance. So if you have time and you would like at some point to look at that website, that provides some additional information. There are also some free trainings on all across Zero Abuse Project's website, but certainly under the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center, that will allow you to have more information related to the topics that are being discussed tonight. Okay, everyone, Allison just texted to say she's back on. I don't see her in Zoom yet, so I'm going to ask if she can hear me, if she can tell me that she's on, so we can figure out how to get her in.
Mute, talking still, talking.
All right, Allison, we just
How
got
terrifying.
I
What a
just-
ordeal. Goodness gracious.
That's okay, Allison, I just made you,
Let's
trying
get
to
back
make
into
you-
this. Yes.
I'm
That
trying
took 10 years off my life. Okay, we're on a hot spot.
So Allison, I just put you back in as a panelist, and that should allow you to open up your screen again and share the PowerPoints.
We're all good. You can hear me. Starting video. It says you cannot start your video because host has stopped it. You have to make me host. There we go. Oh my goodness, that took 10 years off of my life. Apologies. And someone made Tina also a panelist. Thanks, your bunny. I was talking about bunnies before, so it all there's someone is supporting us. So it's all. Let's get back into it. Whew, that was terrifying. Okay, that's a horror story for the rest of my life, and we'll move on and pretend that that didn't happen. So we're up to what if games. Let me get back to that part of the screen. Did I miss any questions while I was away? Oh, Lordy. Okay.
No, we've been talking and I provided some information about what's on the Zero Abuse website. So you can just go right back to your what if games.
So my home Wi-Fi just went down. Don't know why, but I have a hotspot, which I'm now switched to, and that's fully charged. So we're okay. So did you hear me talk about the two things that the teenagers tell us not to do before I move on? Or where did I freeze?
Yes, we did hear that they didn't want you to use any real names.
Perfect.
Yes.
All right. And then in addition to not using any real names, they say, please don't make direct eye contact with them because that freaks them out. Like, what if you're going to a party and someone asks you to, they're like, oh, who have you been talking to? So those are those two pieces. Let's move on, shall we? And pretend that that didn't happen. So we want to do the prevention starting when kids are very young, so that when they hit those trickier years, we have those building blocks to build upon. 12 to 17 is an age that becomes a high risk age. And if you just put yourself back to 12 to 17, very few people would want to relive that again. And if we could, again, if you're in the same space, we could think of 100 different reasons why that's an age that is a tricky time where targeting can happen. So we want to start the conversations early, because when we think about that gut instinct, if you have a teenager, 12 to 17, the part of their brain that's doing the most development isn't the part of the brain that says, is this a good idea? That's the last part that's done. It's the part of the brain that's learning how to argue. And we find that they argue against their gut instinct. And so, like, if you're watching a horror movie and the garage door opens and someone's like, I'm going to go see what that is. And you're like, don't go see what that is. The part of their brain that's learning how to argue starts to argue against their gut. And so we want to help young people understand, and they also argue against people that love them, because the part of their brain learning how to argue is the part of their brain that's forming. And so they practice it quite a bit. And so having these conversations when kids are young, checking in, then we can build on them and not try. And if we're starting them at this age, better late than never, but it's much easier to start young and to keep going throughout the years that are harder, versus not having the conversation at all. And Dr. Walsh wrote a great book about the adolescent brain. And we talk about the fact that we shouldn't be surprised if teenagers do make mistakes. And it's the parents' job, how do we make those mistakes into loving consequences? So, like, my mom growing up, I grew up with all brothers, and she used to tell my brothers and I, she's like, I just pray every night that if you guys do something wrong, you get caught and punished right away. And we're like, who prays that? What does that even mean? And she was like, well, if you steal a candy bar and you have to go and apologize and, you get caught for that. If someone asks you to steal a car, you're not going to steal the car because you paid the consequence for the candy bar. And so when we're thinking about, part of prevention is helping our kids grow up to do no harm. And so if we can hold kids accountable to, the way that you're using your phone to talk to your friends in a way that really the names that you're calling them could be considered really painful for them to see, let's pause on phones here for a little bit and have a conversation about why words are powerful, right? So having those moments before they become, going down the hill very quickly. When we think about prevention, one of the big pieces is trying to think of how are kids targeted. And what we see is sort of the number one piece. Do I have that? I don't have, okay. Is talking to kids about sex. Asking kids for sexual explicit images of themselves. And then there's also that attention and affection, and then sending sexual explicit images themselves without the kid asking. And the kid has this image. It's like, what do I do with it? This is the offenders engaging specifically online. I should have said that. I apologize. And so when we think about that, we have a separate study that they asked folks who had offended in person, and they said, what's the number one thing you're looking for? And the number one thing that they're looking for is kids who have questions about sex. And so we want to help kids understand their body in a way that's positive, that's proactive, where they're coming to us with their questions and not to a person in a chat app, because most people do care about kids, but someone at 3 p.m. in an app wanting to talk to a kid about sex is usually not one of the healthy adults. And we also don't want pornography to be the sex educator of our kids. If we don't have the conversations, they're going to start Googling that. Again, how to talk to kids about pornography is another presentation that we actually have free on our website because we get so many questions about it. But just that sense of, we want to make sure that there's information from you. And so is that a book? There's several books, around the house. I grew up with the classic Where Do I Come From the 1970s with the sperm in the top hat on the cover, the cartoon. Some of you may have also had that. And I didn't know it was different from any other book in our bookshelf until my cousin spent the night. And Dad was like, what do you guys want to read tonight? And I was like, where do I come from? And he's like, no, I do not know what your cousins know about their bodies. We are going to pick a different book. And I'm like, it's so good. But just that idea of, and I always tell parents, pick books that you feel comfortable reading, because if you don't feel comfortable reading them, they won't get read. But going to your local bookstore and looking at the section on books on bodies and thinking, which are ones that I feel comfortable reading to my kids, so that they're coming to me with those questions and not to the kids, on the back of the school bus in a post-COVID world, or Googling. My friend, when his daughter hit puberty, I thought it was an amazing idea. He just got her a written journal and said, if you ever have a question about your body, if you ever hear a rumor and you're wanting to know if it's true or not about bodies, write it in this notebook and put it on my bed. And then I will look and I will write back the answer and put it back on your bed. We never have to talk about it. It doesn't have to be embarrassing. But if you hear, like, if you kiss somebody, they could get pregnant, like, write that if you're not sure. And then I can explain, and maybe I'll have the pediatrician help. Maybe I'll have your aunt help. Like, I will write it back and we'll have that back and forth, because the person who defines the norm when it comes to questions about or what the expectations are around sex and things like that, if we never have those conversations with our kids, the person who swoops in with those conversations may have ulterior motives. And so, just as a baseline, making sexual health, talking about bodies, understanding private parts, things like that are a good baseline to then help with more complicated what ifs down the road. And I have a 2-year-old, and some of the questions that she asks can be embarrassing, but I would much rather be embarrassed than be in a situation where she doesn't have words, or she has a lot of shame around bodies, so that she can't ask if she has a question. The silly example, and I normally don't use it if it's being recorded because I don't want her to be embarrassed as she gets older, but I think this one will be okay. But we were talking, I have a Wizard of Oz book, and so I was talking about Dorothy and Scarecrow, and we get to the Tin Man. She says, Tin Man, okay, so does he have a penis? And I was like, well, possibly, and we don't always know by looking at someone, but just to have some of those I'd rather have her ask, and to know that I'm the person to go to with those questions than to not have her ask. And so it starts young as we build. Any questions, Shannon, before I keep going?
Nope, you're all good. Thanks.
Excellent.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on, one just loaded. How do you talk to a teen who doesn't want to hear or discuss these issues?
Oh, that's a great one. What ifs can be helpful in the car, because I don't want to use captive audience in like a scary way, but like if you have that ability, and to say what I found works best with teens is usually actual scenarios as you learn about them or read about them. Like, hey, a friend at work was talking to me about a story where you could open up any newspaper on any day of the week and there'll be a story, but like where this person caused harm to this person. Is that something that you and your friends ever talk about? Is that something that if you were ever in a situation, and if you go from the bystander perspective, it's really important for me that if you saw something of someone that you were worried was going to be harmed, that you go from standing by to stepping up. And how would you do that? What would that look like? And so, what if you're at a friend's sleepover? I don't think they call it that when you're a teenager, but like if you're at a friend's house spending the night, and somebody has a pornographic movie that they want to show. Like, I just want you to know that I would be really uncomfortable and upset if you're watching that, because there's things that you can't unsee. So let's think of what would be like 3 different ways you could get out of that. Like, find someone else who doesn't want to watch it and go outside and play basketball. Send me an emoji that we've determined means come pick me up. And sometimes when they're problem solving and what ifing, it's a lot less awkward than just like, let's sit and talk about bodies, right? It's far more. Or I've also done the thing, I was a youth minister for 7 years, and sometimes every January would be about bodies. And so we'd send like the letter home to parents and whatever. And I would see kids I hadn't seen all year long, whose parents are like, oh, get to church, they're going to talk about bodies, I want you to have this conversation. And so finding those people who, you can support in that work as well. If they're having a hard time listening to you, maybe there's an aunt that they're really close to. Maybe there's a, who you can sort of tag team with. Have you read this book? Because this is a good book about bodies. I'd love you to read it and let me know what you think, and some of that, so that it's less like a 14-year-old where you sit down and you're like, tonight we're going to talk about bodies. They're like, oh, let's get out of here. Versus like, as you're watching, like you coming in and saying, I read in the newspaper this thing today, and is that something that friends your age are dealing with? Is that something you've heard about? And so having it be a bit more entrenched in what's happening versus out there can be helpful for teenagers. Lures and grooming. kids and teens are most often lured away by attention and affection. So it's not the white van, it's not the person with candy, it's I love you, I care about you. And so that's really challenging because it goes back to that Girl Scout who was like, how do I say no to people that I like? And so we're talking, and lures is that idea of like pulling someone away from something. And grooming is when they start breaking the rules for that kid, for that parent, and for the community. An example that I'll give of grooming could be in our faith community, none of the adult volunteers are allowed to tickle kids. It's too much of a gray area. It could get weird real quick. In faith community context, that's just one of our rules in our policy. And so grooming would be like if one of the adult volunteers or teenage volunteers is always tickling the kids and people are just like, oh, that's that volunteer. That's just what they do. Just let it go. Like that's grooming is making the level of what that person redefining the norms for a culture and people letting it go. And that grooming is also a lot of isolating behavior. So when we think about who forms your net, every kid should have 5 grown-ups they can talk to if they have a problem. If they have a problem about if they have a question about bodies, if they have a question about someone making them feel unsafe, because maybe if it's someone they're dating, they might not want to talk to a parent who already doesn't like that person, or if it's a relative, they might want to feel more comfortable talking to a teacher. If it's someone that someone's dating in the family, it's like, oh, I don't want to talk to the person they're dating because I don't want to ruin this relationship, but I'm worried, So thinking of who those 5 people are, and then we want to pay attention to anyone who separates the kid from that safety net. No one loves you but me. No one cares about you but me. Like that's our big grooming warning sign, is that separation, that isolating, and then redefining, like pouring on gifts, keeping secrets, using attention, affection to trap that kid. So that kid feels like, I like the attention and affection, as most people do, but I don't like this, but how do I tell? And so having that net, when we have a solid safety net, if someone does swoop in and try to separate, we can talk to kids and teens about most people who know the rules want to be one of many people keeping you safe. Someone who doesn't know rules about bodies, whether it's a friend, whether it's someone who wants to date you, whether it's an adult, they start to separate you from the people who love you because they want to be your only net, and that's not how a net works. And so we want to pay attention to people who are isolating. We want to pay attention to people who are creating going against the policies and the covenants of communities, and doing things that aren't allowed without a check of behavior. And so thinking about that, who forms their net. And then sometimes, like if you have a 13-year-old in your life, they might be slamming doors and not wanting to eat, and having difficulty concentrating. You might Google those symptoms and it says your child's currently being abused. Yes, or they could have just been having a really bad week. And if you can say to them, you know what, this person is on your safety net, you're not talking to me about it, but can you talk to this person? Because I want to make sure that you're not alone in this, and that there's a lot of people out there who love you. Now, all that said, sometimes the safety net person has worked their way in and is the problem, which is why we have 5. And if your child brings up someone, when you ask them, who are the 5 on your safety net? If they bring up someone you don't know, it's a great excuse to get to know that person. If they're like, oh, it's my English teacher, Mrs. Warren, and you don't know Mrs. Warren, it's a great excuse to like send a message saying, hey, my kid says if they ever had a problem that you're the person that they would go to. We haven't met. I just want to thank you for being a great teacher. Here's my name. Here's how to reach me. If there's ever have a problem with that you're worried about my kid, please let me know, because they obviously care a lot about you. If that person means well, how awesome is that to have that support? If that person doesn't mean well, it's like, oh, this parent, I'm on their radar. They know about me. They know that I'm connected, and they're monitoring what's going on. And so thinking about that, forming that net piece is a really proactive safety. And I could spend like the entire time just on this slide. I won't, but I was training parents for high schoolers. We were talking about online safety. One of the parents said, it is my job to get my kids safely through high school. It's not my job to get 4 of their friends safely through high school. Because I had flipped it and I said, if we ask kids to make the nets, we should also be looking for kids who don't have a net to be some of those net people for them. So it's not just on the kid. And I was, I was like, well, what do you mean you don't want to be in safety net for other people? She's like, I just want to focus on my kid. That's all the energy I have. And when we think about that's not how the body of Christ works in the faith context, but also We think about, if we want to get our kids safely through high school, it's really good to know their friends. It's really good to know who they're hanging out with. It's really good to know those people in their lives. So if someone's like, hey, let's go jump off a bridge, like, no, you've met my parents, let's not. And so having that be a piece of prevention as well. Was there a question, Shannon, before I keep going?
There wasn't a question, but one person did mention that in their situation, the safety net person turned into the perpetrator. So maybe talking about why the net of 5 is so important.
Yeah, because offender's goal is to be the only net for a kid. I'm using offenders very broadly, different. No one fits into a box. What we often see is them working their way into the safety net and then slowly separating that child from the net. And so being aware of those isolating behaviors, both for the kid and for the community, of saying, okay, I want to, when kids are 9, 10, 11, I'm going to draw their hand, have them draw their people, talk, and then also talk about if someone's trying to separate you from your net. If someone has, the way that we want it to work is, if they go to swimming class, I'm making this up, obviously, and they come home, they're like, oh, I learned from my swimming coach today not to go meet people from the internet, right? And you're like, I've told you that since you're 5. They're like, yeah, but my swimming coach told me, and so now it's real. Like, that's the goal. The flip side of that is they come back from swimming and like, oh, my swimming coach today, they think that it's cool to go meet people from the internet, like, that's that idea of like of flipping that where it could be, well, let's talk about why that's against our family safety rule. Let's talk about how that could be isolating. And kids get the idea of what isolating feels like when we talk about it ahead of time. Because yes, we want to make sure that we have 5 because some offenders are good at getting into safety nets. And then we want to pay attention to people trying to separate from the safety net. And when we think about, people say, well, how do I talk to kids, especially in the scenario you're all dealing with at Menlo, of like about someone that we knew about, and how do we have that conversation after the fact that there may have been there as far as, anyway, I don't want to, I'm not a part of the investigation team, so I know nothing in that context, but just the sense of like, how do we talk about it when it's a specific person? I would say not to put a ton of energy on the specific person, but to spread that energy out. The example that I'll give, which isn't necessarily clear cut by any means, but in Minnesota, when they release a level 3 sex offender back in the community, I go to the parent meeting and parents will say, how do I talk to my kid about this level 3 sex offender? And it's like, they probably, if in this context of this level 3, they might never meet them. They might never talk to them, but this is an opportunity to let's spread our vigilance around and have a conversation about all people. You know what? It's an adult's job to keep kids safe, and there are adults who are working on keeping kids safe, and we just want to make sure that people do know rules about bodies and people do know rules about safety, and most people do. But you might meet people in your life, and you may have already met people in your life who've forgotten or ignoring the rules. Have you ever met someone who's ignored the rules about body safety? Have you ever met someone who's ignored the rules about online safety? And not to necessarily call out a specific person, but use this opportunity is to spread that awareness around. You know what? If you ever do meet someone who doesn't know the rules, you're allowed to say no and get away. And even if you don't say no, it's still not your fault. And if this ever happens, if you ever meet someone who doesn't know rules about bodies and it's making you feel scared or uncomfortable, it isn't your fault, and I would want to know. And we think about, I have this picture of these adorable soccer kiddos, because we think of the sports analogy. If a kid is playing sports with a grown-up who doesn't know the rules to the game, someone could get hurt. And so it's not up to the kid to kick the ball up to the soccer coach and be like, don't you know the rules to soccer? Like, that's not helpful. If you've ever been a kid trying to explain the rules to an adult, doesn't usually go very well. We get off the field and we check in with the person who brought us to soccer or someone else and being like, this person doesn't know the rules and I'm scared someone's going to get hurt. If we meet someone in our day-to-day life who doesn't know the rules about bodies, we don't have to explain the rules about bodies to them. We just get out of that situation and find someone who does. And so that, so that people can then take steps. And so when we think about the idea of, if there's someone that we're talking about specifically that's known, that the kids have met and whatever else, to say, you know what, kids' job to be a kid, adults' job to keep them safe. Adults are working to try to figure out what safety looks like in this context, and what safety looks like with the specifics that are in front of us. But this is a good chance to just review. Have you ever met anyone in our faith community who has made your gut instinct go off? Have you ever met anyone in our faith community who has ignored our family safety rules? If you ever do, please let me know. I want to know about it. I won't be mad. So it's not all the energy on this one person. I mean, I am not a forensic interviewer. I can't prepare a child for a court test. Like, that's not my role. My role is, let's just have a conversation about the fact that you might meet people who don't know the rules. And if you use the, kids who love sports, it's that idea of like, if you're playing football and there's an adult playing with you who doesn't know the rules, or an older kid, someone could get hurt. And so you do not have to explain the rules. Just get out of that situation and find someone who does, so that we can figure out what's going on. And when I keep saying the rules, kids' personal safety rules, the first big one is just to check first. I use the example of like, your parent is the control tower, or the caregiver is the control tower, and the kid's the airplane. And you're going to go out and you're going to check first. You're going to come back. So just that idea about checking first. So before we go into a car with anyone. So if our family safety rule is, before we get into a vehicle, we check with who's taking care of us. That follows, which is very, very rare, the cases where a child is forced into a car, and far more common, hey, will you come with me to get ice cream or whatever it might be. So there's that. We use the buddy system whenever possible. We want to trust our gut instinct, listen to our gut. We don't keep secrets from the person taking care of us. If someone's trying to make us keep a secret, that's a problem. And so, and there's a difference between secrets and surprises. Surprises are very different than secrets. So if someone's trying to get you to keep a secret versus like something that's we're all going to find out about together, we can't wait, we can check in. Having a family password that's used on a cell phone or verbally if you need to get out of a situation. A hard one for like second, third, fourth graders is that adults ask other adults for help. So just adults ask other adults for help. If an adult approaches you and asks you to help, come and check in with me so I can make sure that we can help together. And then private parts are different from the rest of your body. So that's sort of where we start. And on our website, we have like age appropriate rules for kids at different ages, but that's kind of and check first starts at 2, 3, 4, my child, high five. So I know where you're going. You're high five, you're with grandma. Okay. High five. You're, just as like, so we have that physical touch point of who specifically is watching you right now. And then we talk about touches. We don't use good touch, bad touch, because it's very confusing for kids, because a lot of sexual touch does feel good. And so is this good? Is this bad? We just talk about touches. We know the names of our private parts, so that's a big protective factor. If kids know the names of their private parts, it signals to other people they've had conversations around bodies. They know that private parts are different from the rest of their bodies, and kids have the right to say no to private part touches. With little ones, if I'm your caregiver, I want to know if anyone tries to touch or look at your private parts, wants you to touch or look at their private parts, or is asking you to touch your own private parts. If that happens, I want to know, and I won't be mad, but we need to check in so we can figure out how we make a safety plan. Now, there are times when adults do touch kids' private parts to keep them clean and healthy. For example, going to the doctor's office, they might, and you can use that as a teachable moment. You know what? When we're at the doctor's office, they might touch private parts to keep you clean and healthy. I'm going to be there. We're going to talk about it, because touches are never a secret in our family. And so we can frame that I'm here, we're talking about it. It's not a secret. Diapering a younger sibling. Yep, I'm touching your younger sibling to put on their diaper. I'm doing that to keep them clean and healthy. Do you have any questions? Because in our family, we don't keep private part touches a secret. We talk about them if we have a question. I was in the 3rd grade and a girl was raising her hand. She said, I was at my friend's house and a bee stung my bottom, and I know my bottom is a part of my private parts. My friend's dad took the bee sting out. Was that okay? I said, well, let's talk about it. Was that clean and healthy? Well, yeah. Did it make your uh-oh feeling go off? Nope. It just hurt in my bottom. Okay. Did he ask you to keep it a secret? No. He called my mom and said I had been stung by a bee. We all talked about it together. That to me sounds clean and healthy, but you're a kid and you don't have to figure it out on your own. So I'm glad that you asked. You can always ask, and I encourage you to ask to figure out if things are clean and healthy. Touches are never a secret. And if someone does trick them into a touch, still not their fault. They can still tell. And it's okay to tell even a long time after something happened. They're allowed to say no, even if it's someone that they know and the family likes, because we need to explicitly say that, because it's often someone the family knows. And then those very rare abduction scenarios, very, very rare, like greater chance of being hit by lightning, rare. But we don't go anywhere with anyone who doesn't let us check first. If someone tries to make us go with them, that's a problem. We don't go anywhere with anyone who doesn't let us check first. You're more important than your stuff. Leave your stuff behind. You're allowed to yell for help. We don't scream. People tune out screaming. We yell from our gut. And we find any grown-up who can help us. Most adults want to keep kids safe. If we flag an adult at random, this person's making me feel really scared. Can you get my parent in the store? Yep. When we're having conversations with kids using a lot of what ifs, having them identify their 5 trusted adults, keeping it upbeat and positive. And it's not the talk, it's lots of little talks. And doing a family safety night where we just get together and talk about safety is a wonderful way at the beginning and end of every school year to just reframe and see where kids are at. And so, like, what's our fire escape plan? Where do we meet in case of fire? What about bus safety? And at the same time, we talk about bodies and we go through what ifs. And if you have an anxious kid, you may want to think about exactly the way to do this so that it's not like thing after thing after thing. You might want to break it up a little bit. And one of the big phrases that works with kids who are anxious about safety is, but what's our plan? You may never deal with going into where you have to call 911. Most kids don't. But if you do, I just want to make sure that you have a plan. And so what is our plan? Well, I would call 911 and stay on the phone until someone came to me. Yep, that's exactly what you do. You probably not have to know that, but I would rather, when you're anxious, it's better to know that we have a plan and we've practiced our plan versus not having a plan at all. You might never meet someone who doesn't know rules about bodies. But if you meet someone who doesn't know rules about bodies, I want to make sure that we've talked about it and that you have a plan. And so just having that intentional chance to get together and chat. The 2 big building blocks for prevention when kids are young is talking about consent and talking about empathy and role modeling that. People sometimes bristle at consent because they think that it's all about sexual intercourse. And like, we're talking about consent with like, don't pull the dog's tail. He does not want his tail pulled. Give him his space. Ask your friend if she wants to be hugged while she's sliding down the slide. She might need some space right now. It's like talking about bodies and body ownership and is this okay? Do you want a hug? Like, those are things that we model when kids are little. And then as they're getting older, we're talking about consent as permission. And anything romantic, anything with someone's body, they get to decide if they want to give permission or not. And then empathy is so that we don't cause more people to cause harm, is imagining how the other person's thinking. And again, we have different trainings on those building blocks, but I have to bring them up, consent and permission. And everyone has a right to say no at any point. And if you are a kid and the person who is causing the pressure is an adult, there is no consent. Like, there are laws that are written because kids aren't able to consent to anything romantic or sexual with an adult. And then empathy is that piece about passion and feeling. Harming behaviors about disconnection. I'm going to pause here for 1 second. We're going to still end on time, even though my snafu. But I want to pause here because I did say we'd have intentional Q&A time. So I'm going to pause and see if there are questions I haven't answered that I can answer. And then when I answer those, I'm going to finish up these last slides. So I'm going to pause here and look at this adorable child with the teddy bear. Any questions, Shannon?
Alison, there is one question. How do you choose the 5 trusted adults?
It depends on the age. If they're really little, we talk about it more collaboratively in the sense of like, and I try to think of people, if your kids are in school, who are the people at school that you may see? Who are the people who are friends of our family that you feel comfortable talking to? Who are relative, and when they're little, it's like, I know these people. Yep. And then you check your own gut instinct. If any of the people on their list makes you feel uncomfortable, gives you that feeling, let's think of someone else on our list. I don't know if that person has the same safety rules our family does. So let's just think of somebody else. It's not saying they're a horrible person, but you can reframe. With older kids, I ask them, who are the 5 people, if someone is making you feel unsafe or uncomfortable in your body, that you could talk to? And then I love when I'm in like a school auditorium, pre-COVID, of course. And they like bring up all the helper professions, like principal, school nurse, things like that. And I was at one school and I'm like, you're a social worker. The kids, I know the social worker, they clean up the messes. was like, are you confusing social work with custodian? No. When my parents got divorced, I met with them until they cleaned up all the messes in my heart. And like, that's what we're protecting, right? That's what we want them to know the people who can help clean up messes in their heart. And it is a group dynamic. Any other questions? I want to make sure, I don't want to plow through the last slides, but I did give you a little stretch break in the middle of here, and I want to try to get through the last bit if I can.
No, you're good, Allison. No more questions right now.
Do feel free to interrupt, because your questions are more important than my last slides. So if you have a question, I will not be bummed about pausing. Disclosure is oh goodness. Disclosure is a process, and it's not an event. It's not like most disclosure isn't like a one-time telling, although that can happen. I plenty of stories of that, but if they do tell, it's usually to their parent or to a friend their same age. So some of our really empathetic kids get a lot that on their heart and on their brain. And so that idea about talking to kids, if someone talks to you about a problem where hurting is happening, you're allowed and encouraged to ask for help. Adults ask for help when hurting is happening. We don't do this alone. So if you're 12 and your friend is talking to you about someone who's causing them harm or someone who's making them feel unsafe, you're not a bad friend to ask for help. I have a kid's book out that talks about that we carry around problems in a backpack. And if someone puts a grown-up problem in your backpack, we need to find a different grown-up to help us unpack the backpack. And so just that idea of, it's not tattling and telling are two very different things. We're not trying to get someone in trouble. We're trying to get someone out of trouble. And there are things that make it easier for kids to tell the older they get. There's a slight trend. All genders are impacted by sexual violence. It's a slight trend in older adolescent females talking. If the perpetrator moves out of the home or they're not seeing that perpetrator as regularly, that can increase a disclosure. If they have context in the sense of they're going to therapy, they're getting information about bodies, they have a safety presentation, things like that, that can be helpful. Just knowing that their caregiver will support them, involvement of other people, and then just the environment, the cultural context, so the community member involvement. Do we live in a community where having conversations is the norm? And so these are all things that help kids feel more comfortable telling. We know that when it comes to bodies, no is a complete sentence. You don't need the word because after the word no. And if you don't say no, it's still not your fault. So we're empowering kids that they are allowed to say no to people that our family likes if they're asking us to break our family safety rules. We have plenty of what if games on our website. And one of the tabs is what if game, but just that idea of, so it's less about like, you're allowed to say no. That's teaching them a family safety rule. But like, so you're allowed to say no. So what if someone in our family that our family liked asked you to break body safety rules? What if an older kid says they'll give you $5 if you play a secret game with them? And at every school, I almost have a kid be like, I would take the $5 and then I'd run away. And it's like, okay, let's talk about that. You're worth more than $5. You're worth more than $10. You're priceless. You are one of a kind. You deserve to be safe. If someone's trying to give you something to break your rules, you still get to ask for help. A side note, my friend whose daughter's in first grade was at one of my Empower Me classes, and she got off the school bus and my friend's like, what did Miss Allison teach you today? In her little first grade with her backpack, she's like, I learned that I'm priceless. Like, if that's what we learn in body safety class, that is a win, because every kid is priceless. Every kid deserves to be safe. We talk about prevention. The tip of the iceberg is hardening the target. The very tip, it's usually not the most effective message. We need to spread that out and find the people who are bystanders and move them into being upstanders, and find the person causing the harm and challenge them to not act out on that. And there are phenomenal therapists doing phenomenal work with folks who are trying to cause no harm, which is wonderful. That's what we want. And then there's that idea of, how do we go from bystander to upstander? If we're seeing something, it's not about going after the person causing the harm. That usually just escalates. How do we support the people being targeted? What does that look like? And how do we teach our kids to do that? And that's a big piece about empathy. And that's a big piece about bystander intervention. The more people who see something that's happening that makes people concerned, the less likely someone usually says something. And so that idea of what does offering support to the person look like? Is it I mean, thinking about different communities, is it a sermon? Is it just how I use my social media, like the Meghan Markle interview last night that everyone's talking about. It's like, if I see on my social media someone being like, I don't believe anything that she says, that is signifying to me that's not a safe person that I want to have a conversation with about mental health. Then, like, that's just that idea of like, how do we use our voice to offer support to people being targeted, and what does that look like? And that's a whole nother presentation, but it's something that we want to talk through and talk about within our communities. What does survivor empowerment look like? As we wrap up, getting involved, not being afraid to speak up, being involved in kids' activities and daily life, and screening caregivers, stopping by, actually doing the references, unannounced visits, talking to kids. Is there anyone who's ever taken care of you that made you feel unsafe? Some of those kinds of questions. With really little, like, has anyone touched your private parts since the last time that I helped you in the bath? Just some of those kinds of questions, as said, just becomes common to have conversations about bodies, and that knowing that in our family we talk about touches, and signifying that you are involved. Now, I have to be careful because I don't want to have the message be, if you're involved, your kids are never targeted, because we have parents who are super involved and super connected who still have children who are targeted. So that's not the message I want to give, but just that idea of, having multiple adults involved in monitoring and in screening and in hiring and in checking and having those checks and balances with policy can be huge. Some of the book resources, there are tons. I Can Play It Safe is one of my children's books about that just goes into body safety for kids. Gavin DeBecker wrote one for parents called Protecting the Gift. I like a lot of it. I asked one of my college interns to read it, and she came back, she's like, what's a pager? I was like, okay, so it's dated in the sense that, like, it came out before the internet, but there's still a lot of great messages in there just about how do we teach kids to listen to their gut? What does that look like? How does that play out in the very specific? And I like how Gavin lays that part of it out. So just read with that context. And I want to thank you again, because I can't say enough about how I learn about the world and how I learn about my relationship with God through youth work and through the children in my life. And they're little, and they deserve our protection, and they're beautiful, and they deserve to have people take care about them. And so thank you for being invested in their lives. Know that our best prevention tool is adults who care about kids. So if you're feeling like, what can I do? Being invested, being connected is hugely helpful in community safety. Just a few side notes is that in Jacob Wetterling's case, I talked about at the very beginning. After he was missing for 27 years, they did find the person responsible for taking him, and sadly for ending his life. And Jacob wore in the number 11 as a soccer jersey. And so we started the 11 for Jacob, which is 11 traits that Jacob had when he was with us. And we do an 11K and a 5K every October. You can do either. I do the 5, not ready for the 11 yet, as a fundraiser for our agency. So if you're someone who does love running, if you want to support our mission, last year we did a fun heat map of all the places where people had registered to run. Know that that's coming up in October. Thank you for believing that everyone has the role in keeping kids safe. We're an agency that wants to get ahead of the problem. We offer a lot of trainings on body safety, internet safety, adverse child experiences, disclosures, all the things. We want to help equip families to have hard conversations. And so take a look at the videos on our website. If you want to ever support our mission, please feel free to do that with a gift. And this is the 11 for Jacob. And I always feel like we spend so much time telling kids what not to be. We forget to say, and this is what we want you to be. We want you to be joyful. We want you to be kind. We want you to be positive. And this is what our family is working to do. And so kids, pay attention to both what we say, but more importantly, what we do. So having the 11 for Jacob on my wrist every day for me, or on my fridge every day, is a good reminder of, am I really being thankful? Am I really finding opportunities to be generous? And just using that as, and if you follow our work, Jacob Wetterling Resource Center, you'll see a lot of that 11 for Jacob messaging. So this is my contact information. My email is Alison with 1 L. My mom is from Australia, and she jokes that Americans are excessive and add extra letters. So if you're trying to remember how to spell my name, 1 L, because that's how my mom sees the world. So that's how to reach me via email. That's our 24-hour crisis line. We have volunteers, staff in the evenings and weekends, and then employees, staff during the day. So we want to make sure that no one feels alone in this. I mean, if you even just want to say, okay, I have a 6-year-old and they happen to be on the autism spectrum. And because if you've worked with one child with autism, you've worked with one child with autism. It's hard to say this is how to have this conversation with all children on the spectrum. That anyone who says that has no idea what they're talking about. But if you want a one-on-one problem solve and think and dream, we do trainings on specifically on the importance of prevention for kids with disabilities. You know, if you're saying, I need just a little bit of help because of my child's at this age and we haven't had this conversation, or I need a little bit of help because my child maybe on the spectrum or whatever it might be, know that you can reach out to us and we can do one-on-one chats about what prevention might look like. And you could say, you know, this is what I would try, and then come back, let me know if it works or if it doesn't, and we can dream together. So feel free to reach out to us so that we can be as helpful as possible during this time. And I just, again, thank you for your patience. Mid-presentation was a bit of a nightmare. So thanks for Shannon for treading water there while I switched from my home Wi-Fi to the hotspot, and I have no idea why I did that. And it probably will never do it again, but now I'll be terrified. So there's that. Any questions in our last 5 minutes together that I can make sure that I cover?
Yes, first, I want to let everybody know it's been asked a couple of times about a recording. And yes, we will send a recording of this training. So just like you saw it on the screen, we will also send the PowerPoints along with that recording. And we had a request for a transcript. So we will get this transcribed as well. And as soon as the transcript is ready, we'll send all 3 items to Menlo personnel, and Menlo staff have confirmed. They have all of your email addresses because you registered for this training, and they will also be able to make that information available to others. So Alison, the final question, which you and I may not 100% be able to answer, but was asking if volunteers are mandated reporters. And I would say that that is dependent on California law.
It's state by state.
Right.
Yeah. State by state. Like, I have some friends who do prevention work in states where everyone is a mandated reporter, which makes their lives easier. Minnesota, it depends what they're a volunteer in as to, I'm sorry, if this is transcribed, I don't want to give like, now I'm like, oh, it's transcribed, the poor transcriber. I talk so fast. But yes, it depends state by state. So I do not know off the top of my head California's mandated reporting laws. So take a look at that. Reach out to your local child advocacy center if you're not sure. And I would just say, regardless if it's the law or not, I feel like ethically, and especially as people of faith, it's important that we speak up and not stand by if we're worried that a child's being hurt. I had a good friend of mine who was physically abused by a parent, and she said, I would come to church with bruises and black eyes and no one ever said anything, and just people brushed it off. And she's like, people knew, like, there's no way that they couldn't have known. And it just made me feel like the church endorsed his behavior too. And so I think that idea of, I don't know California law, but I think as people of faith, we don't choose to stand by, we choose to stand up.
And Alison, some folks have weighed in for us that volunteers are not mandated reporters in California. I also put a link to the list of folks who are mandated reporters under the California law. So there's a couple of resources there to help out. So thank you to those of you who weighed in.
My apologies for the technical difficulties midway through. Thanks for sticking with us. Lovely to virtually meet you all. Thinking of you all in the days and weeks and months to come.
Thank you, everybody. For those of you who have no more questions, you are dismissed, as we like to say. You're free to go. But Alison and I will stick around for a couple minutes monitoring the chat in case anybody has any final questions. So thank you again so much for spending your evening with us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.